So, okay. Brooke, can you hear us? Brooke?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, could you introduce yourself? And we'll start promptly at 6. What time is it? I don't even have my...
5:59, Michael.
You got 1 minute.
Okay.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Brooke Wallace. I was the program director at Generation Citizen for the New York chapter. Generation Citizen is a national nonprofit that partners with middle and high schools to provide a curriculum and training and support to teachers to help students learn how to be advocates for themselves and learn the many different ways they can be civically engaged. I was part of the New York Community Trust Fellowship last summer. I can't believe how time flies. And I'm so excited to be part of this discussion today. And actually happy to share that I'm working for a really great company called Re-Up Education that focuses on helping dropout students re-enroll and complete their degree. So currently now on the West Coast, though, in gorgeous San Diego, but thinking a lot about all of my colleagues and friends in New York.
And I see Zoe Rabinowitz, who is the winner of our first door prize. Zoe, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Zoe Rabinowitz, the proud winner of the first Fellowship Door Prize. And I'm the Associate Artistic Director of Yasamar Dance Theater, which is a nonprofit based in New York since 2005. And we do performance and education programming to uplift the narratives of underserved communities and sort of emphasize the universality of the human experience through dance.
So I think we should get started. For our guest tonight, this is our seventh year of fellows who represent all the subsectors of the nonprofit world in New York City. And they have qualified on the basis of the recommendation of their executive directors as emerging leaders. But the fact of the matter is they are leaders as of this moment. And we want them to keep that on their eyes. The New York Community Trust created this program 7 years ago to help create the most talented generation of executive directors in the history of New York nonprofit sector. And we've had many of our graduates have already ascended to the executive director post or have taken on greater leadership, and we couldn't be more proud of all of them. And so will you join me in giving them all a hand of thanks? Russell, that includes you. All right. I'm Michael Seltzer, for those of you who may not know me, and Shelley and Mike and I are the staff of the program. Mike, raise your hand. You know, we have just been through a tragedy that I can't find the words to articulate, with the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And my initial impulse is we should postpone this program. And I then thought about what she would like us to do. And she would probably say, full speed ahead. Let us be clear, she was not only a brilliant jurist, she was a brilliant exemplar of tonight's program. And it's a severe loss. I felt we wanted to honor her. This is a picture of when she was, I think, at Columbia University. You know, where she could not get I'm sure you all know the history. She graduated top of her class at Columbia and could not get a job at a law firm upon her graduation. Do we have, Shelley, Mike, do we have the statement we were going to follow with?
We do, Michael. So this is a statement actually from New York Women's Foundation, of which we have Anna Oliviera here with us tonight. I was going to ask Rashida to read it, but I also invite Anna as well, since I believe Anna was the one who wrote it.
Anna, would you like to read it?
Yeah, I think Anna would be great.
Sure. So in memory of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
We join you in mourning the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a fierce champion for justice and women's rights. The weight of her loss feels especially heavy in a year that has been marked by a global health and economic crisis, an overdue reckoning on racial justice, and continued attacks on democracy. Yet through this, we must pause to reflect on the life of a woman who fought for what is right through her final days, laying the framework for a more equitable society.
Thank you, Anna. And I know there's so many statements have come out, but I thought you really touched both the head and the heart with the statement that you issued this morning. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to say this is a program I've wanted to do a long time because it's very personal to me. In a way, I could not be more appreciative of the women that I met in the early days of the women's movement and since in the 1970s, who made me a better person and certainly made me a better man. And so for me, it's a coming home to of all the things that I have been grateful to for the women that I have loved and who've been in my life. And we welcome, all I can do is hope for the men that are joined us on the call, that you have had women as cherished as I have had to learn from and how to be leaders, because I truly believe that the women's way of leading is the way of all of us leading at this time and in the years ahead. And I see we have Rashida here. So Rashida, I have to read the title. Ladner-Seward is the Vice President of Program Excellence in Expand ED Schools, which was previously known, Rashida, as PACE, right?
The After School Corporation, yes.
Yeah, and would you just quickly tell folks what your organization does, because it's really quite incredible, and of course a past fellow.
Absolutely. So thank you to Michael, Mike, and to Shelley for thinking of me to moderate this conversation. And again, my name is Rashida Ladner-Seward. I'm the VP of Program Excellence at Expanded Schools, a position that I believe my experience in the fellowship propels me to be prepared for. And I so appreciate the program and the leadership that's been demonstrated throughout. And I think everyone who's gone through this program would agree that it's such a great opportunity to prepare future leaders, current and future. So Expanded Schools is a nonprofit about 22 years old. We were formed in 1998 to create a sustainable after-school system here in New York City. And we actually piloted programs that became the exemplar for then Mayor Bloomberg's expansion of after-school as a citywide obligation through his out-of-school time initiative, which is now called COMPASS, or Comprehensive After School System, that's run through the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development. So the organization was really a pioneer in leading the work of comprehensive and high quality sustainable after school and making it a public responsibility. And in my role, I have the wonderful privilege of leading a phenomenal, brilliant team of directors and managers who oversee our grant-making portfolio to over 100 schools, and our professional development that we provide to after-school providers and their teams, many of which are not formal educators, but are educators in their own right, teaching artists and other professionals who bring their talent and expertise to youth across New York City schools. So I'm delighted to do the work that I do and really excited about this evening's esteemed panel of wonderful women leaders.
Thank you, Rashida. You all, I hope, have received the bios. We, in the interest of time, because we promptly will stop at 7:30. I feel it's unusual and cruel treatment to be on a Zoom call longer than 90 minutes. And some of you probably agree with me on that. So there, as is our tradition, there will be a door prize at the end of tonight. So that's a tradition that we've had to expression of our caring and appreciation for each and every one of you. And I will now turn it over to Rashida, who's our moderator and conversant.
Rashida?
Okay. Yes, thank you. I'm trying my best to make sure that I keep out some of the background noise that may happen here in my home. So apologies for that. But we have 4 phenomenal guests. And our topic this evening is women's ways of leading. And so I would like Lori Sokol, Linda Lambert, Anna Oliviera, and I'm trying to see if our 4th guest.
Yes, Mary Gardner.
I'm sorry, Mary. I'm trying to organize my Zoom screen appropriately to share a little bit about their experiences as women leaders. And I'm going to start the conversation off with a couple of guiding questions around your leadership. And so the first one is, and I'll pitch it to, I'll start with Lori first. Why is feminine leadership important, and why should it be valued?
Very good question. First of all, thank you for including me in this discussion. I think it's very important, very urgent, and very timely, right, that we discuss issues like this. So your question, Rashida, actually reflects what I wrote my latest book about, which was published last month, called She Is Me, How Women Will Save the World. And within it, I've interviewed 30 women from all walks of life, all parts of the world, all races, orientations, ages, etc. Some famous that most of us, the names who are familiar to us, like Gloria Steinem and Billie Jean King, even the former Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, Nobel Peace Prize winners, ambassadors, foreign ministers, and those that don't have any formal titles. But the reason why I chose these 30 women, out of all the women I do know, is because they lead by utilizing traits, qualities that in patriarchal cultures are viewed as soft and weak, but actually it's the complete opposite, right? Qualities like sensitivity, compassion, empathy, introspection are those qualities when leaders show their vulnerabilities, right? That's really what takes courage. And these 30 women have done that and continue to do that, not only in a variety of ways to save the countries, to save lives, to save communities, families, etc. And what is ironic is that this book came out in August. Actually, I finished it in February, about a month before the COVID-19 pandemic really took hold, right? And so if we look at what leaders, female leaders of countries, how effective they have been, right, in limiting and minimizing the impact of COVID on the citizens of their countries and the economies of their countries versus many of the men who are in similar positions who are leaders of their countries. What we have seen and continue to see is that women-led countries have been much more effective by utilizing these traits and qualities to lessen the impact of the pandemic. So that's why it's important. That's why we should all learn from them. And also, I want to put out there that it's not to say that males aren't born with the same abilities, right, the same qualities to express, but in patriarchal societies, as we know, they are discouraged, right, from showing vulnerability, sensitivity, empathy, compassion, because it's seen as feminine, girlish, right? What's the worst thing we can call a boy? He acts like a girl, right? Actually, it's the opposite, that it's the so-called feminine qualities that are more courageous and more effective, and we're seeing that around us more and more every day.
Thank you, Lori. And Mary and Linda, the topic tonight is actually based on the title of a recent book that the two of you co-authored, Women's Way of Leading, or Ways of Leading, rather. How would you add to some of the ideas that Lori just shared with us in terms of why it's important?
Well, I'm really struck by the overlap in what Lori has found and what we found over a period of time. Some of the same qualities, some of the same ways of leading, and some of the same roles and traits that people, women in certain countries have that other countries or other parts of the United States do not have. We began our work quite a while ago in terms of, I think, Mary, it was in the early 90s when we began holding groups and interviewing women and focus groups of women. And we came out finding the similar things. And we thought of it in terms of what were the themes of all those interviews, almost 200 that we did, and what were the kinds of perspectives that we found. We decided to use the word perspective because we didn't want it to seem like stages or boundaried pieces of marching forward or linear in any way. So we created a framework for the book that is written with stories of both well-known women and women in the United States and in Canada that we knew and worked with. So we're co-authors of this book. We've been friends for, what, Mary, 30 years. Mm-hmm. When we tell you a little bit more about how we came to these feelings or these decisions, tell you more about our childhood growing up and how that occurred. But we, let's see, we started our research through what's called the AERA, which is at the American Educational Research Association. And we began these groups over a long period of time before we started to write. And in the very beginning, I was working in Egypt, which gave me an opportunity to see women's roles in a very classical patriarchic society. So I'll stop there for a moment and go to Mary.
Yeah, I will add that although women represent over half of the talent pool that are available for leadership, we are not proportionally represented when it comes to leaders in either worldwide or in the United States or even in local communities. And in the book, we did do some research on the number of women in 2009 or eight or nine, who were holding certain positions in government and professional positions. When we knew about that we were going to be on this, I went back and looked at them. We've made a little progress in those 10 years, but not enough. And so we know that the importance of women's leadership is still not recognized, even though Aristophanes wrote a play in 450 BC that was called Women in Power. And he demonstrated in that play that women have always been known to be the leaders in equity and equality. So it's been a long haul. We're certainly coming, but we do need to do a lot more work. And I think that having women and men working together on leadership, particularly women's ways, will promote it a lot faster. It won't take centuries ahead. So we think our book is a contribution to the lives of women, and it's time that it gets sung a lot of, not just our book, but all of the ideas. Laura, you are capturing some of the same concepts that I think just need to be shouted from the rooftops. And I have to say, just going back a little bit, that a lot of my experience has been working with nonprofits. While I was an educator and in administration, I have spent at least 35 years of my life working as a volunteer or as a board member of many volunteers, and specifically one that is with art in education. The Montalvo's art colony is doing a lot of the same work that sounds like you're doing in New York too, with after school activities and increasing the number of children who have access to the arts. And I'm currently working with a nonprofit called Parisi House, which is a center for women and their children, a residential center for women and their children who are addicted. And I have spent about 13 years working with that organization. So for me, it is time that we do the work of making sure that women's ways get included in our definitions of leadership and leader. I think that's about it.
Thank you. Anna, I'd like to switch to you. As President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, based on what you've heard your co-panelists share so far, what do you think, and Michael alluded to this earlier, but like, what do you feel men actually can learn from the way women lead? What are some of Lori touched upon some of those shared traits and qualities that are transferable, but what can you add to that part of the discussion? Or what would you like to rather add to that part of the discussion?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Michael, Rashida. And it's just so nice to see so many of my dear colleagues there. And I wanted to say that for me, fragmented time, right? So we barely see each other close anymore. So thank you for being there and thank you for this opportunity. So, this may sound really strange, right? Because I work in a place that says New York Women's Foundation, like it's an identity, a gender identity in an organization. But I think perhaps because of that, we know that gender is a construct, right? And that the fluidity of gender is, I think we're being blessed by some of the liberation that our gender expansive and cis and trans in particular communities are teaching us about gender. So, but we are socialized, as has been mentioned before, right? In certain ways of behaving in the world and in certain ways of looking at ourselves and looking at other people. So and I think it's important to talk about, I don't think we can talk about leadership without talking about power. And when we talk about power, I think that we need to understand that the definitions of leadership are embedded in a highly structured and a highly racialized, classified, genderized, and economically, disparate world. And so our beliefs about leadership, right? Women's leadership, quote unquote, men's leadership, I think they're imbued with all these constructions that I think we need to look at. And the other thing is that, we're very different as women, right? And I'm going to say that our beliefs about Blackness in leadership, whiteness in leadership, ethnic related leadership traits, our views of ourselves, our belief in people. I mean, it's just so, our stereotypes of leadership are so important, I think, to be looked at, because they, of course, can be impediments to our own sense of leadership. So what do I think that, in the case men and women, and I'm going to say gender expansive, and what we can learn from each other. I think the first thing has been said by my 3 other colleagues, which is, you know, looking at the very things that are, from a societal point of view, working against us, that we flip that, right? We transform the so-called deficits that are expressions of stereotypes and transform them into assets, right? I mean, that I think crosses all kinds of structures. I think that I said this recently to a group of Latina, Black, and Asian women. I don't think that there were any women of our native nations, but maybe they were, and I didn't know in this particular conversation. It was a large group. That imagine yourself interviewing somebody for a job, looking for a leader, an executive director, a CEO of, in the case was a not-for-profit. What are the attributes that you're going to ask about and that you're going to value? I would say that the first, and how you're going to present yourself. I would say that I would invite the first thing, and this is true for women as well, of all descents, of all races, colors, ethnicities, and class, but not all classes actually, economic class, is that to be able to produce results in the world, to create what you want to see in the world, when you don't have ownership of voice, the definition of concepts, and financial resources, when you're not at the table making the decisions, already speaks about you as an incredible leader. Because I look at leadership, I have to look at leadership in the context of followership. And Darwin and I have had this conversation once a little bit, that what is leadership but a relationship to followership, right? Because there are no leaders without followers.
Right.
So the reality of followership should be an exceedingly empowered reality, but it isn't. It's not perceived that way. And the reality of leadership needs to be, I believe, perceived as a very dependent reality. So what do I think that we can learn from each other? I think is that. I think is the awareness of how access to power in our lives, and by defined power, not power over, but power towards, the ability to make something happen in the world that I'd like to see happen. It's not about oppression, it's not about domination, but it's the ability to be able to co-create something that I think is important. Any of us thinks is important. So what I think we can exchange across gender is very mediated and influenced by what we exchange around race and color and class.
Because and I think it begins at childhood, and that as we now raise our children, we have the opportunity to teach or work with them on aptitudes that are female and male, and that girls don't have to just be girly and males don't have to be competitive and strong, but we look at all of the qualities that are within men and women and teach both genders equally.
And I think, Mary, that also to go deeper into, you know, how do the attributes to different women shape the perception and the assets of leadership?
Yes.
Rashida, can I
hope that was helpful
in about leadership?
Absolutely.
Okay. We define leadership, I think, a little differently. And as a result, it is an open, non-trait, non-role connected concept. We assume that everyone has the right, the capability, and the responsibility to lead. It starts with that assumption. In 1995, in the Constructivist Leader, we proposed a very different definition of leadership. And this came about really as watching the field of leadership. And for me, it was administrator, school principal, university person, and watching leadership attached so much to role and trait that everyone else was a non-leader. And those were usually men, but not always. And they often operated as though the power situated in formal authority was what gave them the right to operate in rather traditional ways. Our definition of leadership is about learning together in community, purposeful learning together in community, and that leadership is larger than well, think of ship, friendship, mentorship. Any word with a ship on it tends to mean that it's about that. But leadership, that it's about community, that is about reciprocal learning together, and that is about shared purpose, broadens it into everyone can be and is a leader. So I tend, Anna, not to use follower because I think it's a metaphor kind of stuck in walking behind, looking for the cues of the formal leader, but to think more of participants in the leadership process. And often those are mobile and flexible. So a participant moves in as leader, a leader moves in as this, and it's a very interactive kind of process. And then we've written about that for the last many years as trying to see it differently.
And it was the basis that we took, that was the basis we used in the book, Women's Ways of Leading.
Thank you. I saw a lot of heads nodding when you all were talking, and I know folks will want to ask some questions, and we definitely have reserved some time after our breakout conversations to take some towards the end. There's shared leadership. There's all of those different dynamics that you all were describing. All of us on this call are leaders, and but some of us go into work that really allows us, or makes us explore the dynamics of being a leader specifically, and I think the four of you have that in common. So it's not just about leading an organization, it's about leading an organization that contributes to the advancement of supporting, highlighting women leaders. I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit about your personal journeys and what made you, as individuals, feel like this was something that you were called to do. This is your life purpose.
I can start if that's okay with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I felt this was my life purpose for as long as I can remember. Not that I would necessarily head up a global women's news organization, but certainly that I felt very impassioned from probably early teens to use my words, which were on the page at the time as opposed to on the computer screen, to make a difference in others' lives, particularly the lives of women and girls, as they had done for me. And part of my book is also memoir, and the first chapter is entirely memoir about having grown up in an extremely violent patriarchal household where, the first line in my book is, when I was 5, I wanted to die. So that gives you an example of what my life was like, and having a mother who internalized the misogyny, and a brother who, the brother who was just as much of a bully as our father. So it didn't make sense to me that I would be, as I grew up, be given these talents, like intellectually, excelling in school at a very early age, athletically, excelling on it, whether it be a baseball field or a basketball court or a tennis court. Why would I have these talents if I wasn't meant to use them? You know, my family always told me, my mother told me in particular, never do anything in your life that make the men in your life look bad. Okay. And it didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't really until I was about 12 or 13 years old and I discovered Ms. Magazine, right, MS period, which for the first time, I knew that there were other females in this country who thought like I did, to be independent, to want a career, to want to help other women, and to not feel comfortable or satisfied and even angry at the patriarchal system that presided and still presides in our country. There were also other writers like Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, I read that in 10th grade. So it's these women writers, right, that have always spoke to me, even though I didn't have to know them personally. I knew I was not alone. So when I discovered I also have a talent for writing, I knew what I'm here for. I always knew what I was here for, to bring those words and my stories and my experiences and the woman I know out there to those who need to hear it, need to be inspired. In fact, it was Gloria Steinem who, it was just almost 2 years ago when I met with her, had encouraged me to write this book because she knew somewhat about my history. And she said to me that, you know, there's so many women and girls out there, you've not only survived, but you've triumphed. And there's so many women and girls out there who could benefit from hearing your story, knowing they can do so as well, and for you to set an example for them. And what is probably the best compliment I could have received since the book came out was from a number of women who wrote to me privately, whether it be on LinkedIn, via email, via my website, through Women's eNews, that a couple of them said they were about to give up for a variety of different reasons, all of which we are experiencing in this country today between the pandemic, the economy. But when they read my book and my story and how I triumphed over what would really be a lot of people would not. They knew that they can make changes, that they have more control over their lives, that there's always opportunity out there, and it's up to them to find it, and they have more control over their lives than they thought. So that is the most important thing that I feel I could do for others, because other women, as I was growing up, and still other women do for me. And that whole sense of community, helping one another, empowering one another, being vulnerable and telling our stories is my mission, as it is the mission of so many women who have encouraged me over the years.
Thank you.
Lori, it sounds very much like our backgrounds with mothers and domineering fathers, and was very much the same. Although my brother, I would say, now that I look back on it, was a feminist at the time I was growing up. But I think the important thing for me in terms of how I really came to understanding was in work with other women who, and a few men who acknowledged and noticed traits or qualities that I had that they identified as leader. And then working in collaboration with a lot of women in education, I learned that I needed to be reflective about what I did and inclusive. And I think those are now attitudes that I carry forward in my work with mixed groups, although most of the people I work with are women because I'm in education and in nonprofit, and most nonprofit and educators are women. So meeting Linda in the 90s when she had gone to Egypt to work, And I was a substitute teacher at the university for her, because I was just coming off of a year at Harvard as a visiting practitioner, and I had no job. I took as a substitute teacher, and it was the work with her that she basically mentored me to be able to express and reflect and express what I believed about either myself and about leadership. So working with others is really critically important too in a path of learning.
Linda, would you like to add to that?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Rashida.
No, I said, would you like to add to what Mary mentioned?
Well,
there was a kindred spirit with the two of you
yes,
joining forces.
yes. I was thinking about today to define that relationship, and it's sort of like a soul sister. Somebody you meet and you think, well, did I know her in another life? You know, because it's so quick, and it's, you know that that person you're going to walk with probably down a very long trail, and we shared values and we shared senses of community and family. But I'll back that up just a little bit to say my mother was probably the first person to influence me. I was born in Chicago, but I grew up in this little Kansas town of 300 in the 50s. And my mother had only gone to the 8th grade, but she was so smart and a feminist and really tough. And she wore jeans before any woman in town with the apron would exchange that. And she had great dreams for me and thought I could do everything, anything. But I must admit that I disappointed her terribly at first, and I got married young, and she thought it was all over. You know, for Kansas girls getting married out of high school, I mean, that's young, and that's, your dreams are gone from her point of view. So it was even more contingent upon me then to make something of my life and not disappoint her any longer. She also believed in reincarnation. So when we went to Egypt, she told me she was reincarnated from an Egyptian and would describe, anyway, it sounds like she was she lived a lot in fantasy and dreams. But she was a real influence. And so when meeting Mary, it was like I had another person who was, we could dream together. And my husband as well, I must admit. So when we came back, we started this almost 20 years of research and 200 and some interviews. And, but we have not, well, we have written one book since this book. We've written 8 books on leadership. Mary has been a co-author in 3 of them. But anyway, I better stop.
We could go on though, because our relationship has been very meaningful, and it's been the dialogue that we've had with each other over what we observed from the classes that we were teaching together and the students in those classes. And what women and men both were telling us about leadership, the difficulties and the rewards. So I think that it's probably, as we've illustrated in Women's Ways of Leading, it's a path. How you come to being a person who is in leadership. It's a path, and you're learning all the time. Here I am, 80 years old, and I'm still learning. You'd think I would have to stop, but I'm not. It's just as important to me today to read a book such as I read for preparing for today, Carol Gilligan's book, Joining the Resistance. And then also going back to several of the books that were a basis for our theories about women's ways of leading, and seeing how they still fit or how we've moved beyond them. And so to all of you, I think it's going to be a continued learning. And the fact that you have this fellowship is certainly an added benefit to how you develop as leaders. And if we can develop together and not bifurcate masculinity and femininity anymore, bring it together as we are all humans and work more carefully together, we will have a better democracy. So it's that belief system that still drives me today. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a model for me. She was not in our book as women, as a way, we listed women to watch. She was not, because we had put Sandra Day O'Connor in, and we tried to distribute ethnically, racially, and professionally the women that we covered. And so we didn't include her, but we did have great discussions about her.
Here, here. Anna, before we go into breakouts, would you like to share a little bit about your personal journey and what led you to really be a champion for women's leadership and women's causes?
Sure. First of all, I understood when I hear the shared leadership between Linda and Mary, I understand why that paradigm of that such a connected relationship between what I call followership and leadership. So I wanted to acknowledge that and give you kudos for that. It's a very rare experience, but it's a very precious experience. So, I think I never thought of myself in any one particular way. I'm being very candid. I think I would say that I like to be a problem solver more than anything else. And I think that I appreciate the ability to create in the world with others what we want to see. That's how I got there. I think that in my case, I've been extremely lucky in having people that reflected, took risks on me and reflected things about me that I probably didn't even see. But there was a time, there was a moment in which I experienced and I understood the concept of influence. And I think that the concept of influence is an important concept in this conversation, right? It's part of the chemistry of exchange that I think about taking on these roles that have a formal attribution of producing solutions or bringing others together to produce solutions together, or taking visions and making things into reality. So I think that my message is about intentionality, and it's about that intentionality is important, but it doesn't always happen and comes ahead. Sometimes it's an occurring thing as opportunities come and as people see people, reflect people in different ways. I'm an immigrant. I'm a light-skinned Latina immigrant. So I never really said, oh, I'm gonna be that, and that's why I think that these conversations are always embedded in the threads that make us, as I was saying before, and that the threads that make us, they both, as we said, are assets, but sometimes they're not, the concept is not in that same way, even culturally speaking, different traditions, just that different relationships to not the concept of leadership, but I think the experience of leadership. And I don't think in my life, being led by others hasn't always been an exchange thing, hasn't always been a validating experience. So I think that that contributed to my hesitancy in having that intentionality. Let me just tell you very candidly that my first job in a formal executive director position happened at Gay Men's Health Crisis. Michael knows that. And I did not apply for the job. I never saw myself as an executive director, let alone at something called Gay Men's Health Crisis. It was a historical situation. And it were other people, members of the board that saw something. It was a time of great trouble, a Gay Men's Health Crisis, great trouble. So I didn't have that intentionality. I said yes to the invitation, to the request, but the intentionality came after, and I'm grateful for that. But times of turmoil, are important times, and we live in these times. So I wanted to say to the fellows, to you, that times of turmoil are times of great opportunity, are times of great construction of new things and shifts in who matters, I think, and what matters. So I think formal and more informal positions of leadership and your own trajectory in moments like this are very important. I just wanted to encourage you on that way, and you have incredible other people here speaking with you who have, who have so much already established about leadership. But, and I so appreciate what you were saying, Mary, that things are shifting, and how leaderships emerge. I mean, when I think about the exceedingly important and racial justice uprising, the expressions of leadership are so different than formal leaderships in other ways. So I just wanted to say that as honoring that, and as wanting to, have a certain freedom for each one to make your own expression of your leadership in the historical moment that you were living in, moments in the historical lives that each one of us is part of. So thank you, Rashida, for
Yeah, and thank you, Anna, for that, because you
asking
helped me
about
remember that my mother actually was an informal leader. She never held a leadership position formally, but her wisdom and her graciousness was she was a leader in her community and in her church because of that, of her attributes. And I think that, as Linda was explaining our definition of leadership, we now, all of us, have the opportunity of being informal leaders, maybe more often than we are formal leaders. And that the informal leader is as important in things being accomplished as the formal leader is. Thank you, Anna. That was helpful for me.
Thank you each for sharing a little bit with us about your personal journeys. And I think, my takeaway from that is that, there are different things that happen over the course of our lives, often in our childhood, that may ignite that passion for what we want to do and how ultimately we may want to lead, but that leadership is evolving. It requires camaraderie and just a network of support and people who, co-lead with you and champion what you do, and that the learning never stops, right? And so we keep retooling and refueling and re-engineering who we are and how we do things to continue to cultivate being great and strong leaders. So that's really an important wisdom to share with us. And so I think now what we will do is spend maybe about 10 to 15 minutes in breakout groups where we can have some smaller group conversations about some of what we've heard in the last 55 minutes, but also maybe how we're seeing women's leadership exemplified in our own work, or in what we're seeing happening here within current events. And so it's really an open conversation, and we'll come back together, share some of the common themes, and hear some parting words from our panelists. So Shelley, you'll put us into our breakout?
Yes, absolutely. I've set it up so that you should each have some time with one of our conversants or our wonderful moderator, Rashida. We'll be in groups of roughly 8 to 10.
Thank you. Back into the room.
Oh,
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm sorry. I know 15 minutes is a short amount of time. We're
Yes, I love my group. I'm so upset. I was so blessed with Lori. Lori is such an exceptional teacher, woman. I am just so blessed to be in that room with her. I just did not want to stop talking to her.
Thank you.
We'll see if we can leave some time for you all to exchange some contact information and all that kind of good stuff.
So inspiring, so inspiring.
Yeah, if the panelists or our speakers are willing, we'll share their email if they're comfortable with
yes.
We're definitely interested.
So inspiring.
Yeah.
And we would like to figure out how we can be included in some of your other future activities. Because as I say, I'm continuing to be a learner of leadership, and I'd like to follow you.
Oh, absolutely.
You are women and men to watch.
You're now part of our family, and this family you don't get divorced from.
Oh, good.
Hey.
Good.
But I can't handle one more divorce. I've already had 2. So.
It gets separated.
Well, Shelley, can you give our information to the group?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send it out to everybody who RSVP'd. I can also ensure that all of you get invited to our leadership conversations in the future.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, while I'm taking care of that, Rashida, do you want to lead the discussion and possibly some Q&A?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm wondering, I'm glad that everyone had great discussion in their breakouts. I'm not sure if I was as engaging and, you know, had such a dynamic group, but I hope that those that were assigned to me enjoyed the conversation. And I guess one of the things I wonder is if any of you have any burning questions for our panelists. If you want to either put it in the chat or even unmute yourself, you can feel free. But one of the things that came up for me, and Michael, I'm wondering if there's stats, is just how the nonprofit sector in general seems to have a lot of great dynamic women leaders, and it almost seems disproportionate to what you see in the corporate sector, and wondering, you know, if there's a story there, just with nonprofits being about giving, community-based quite often, et cetera, and women being drawn to this work. So that was just something that I just surfaced when we were getting ready to come back into this larger group, but also, you know, everyone sharing great stories about the organizations that they work for and the women leaders there. And so I just, you know, I think our sector just has a lot more women leaders and, you know, women-driven organizations.
Yeah, Rashida, I can just do a quick addition to that. in my just recent research, what I found out is that we are in the teens and 20s in most places except nonprofit. And in the nonprofit world, 46% of the leaders are women. So we're getting close to a majority. However, not many of them are the CEOs. They may be decision makers and in somewhere in the executive group, but they are not the final CEOs. And part of it, unfortunately, is because we, and I include myself in that, willing to work for less. And we don't necessarily make the kind of money that they do in the corporate world or even in government jobs. So those are still protected and mostly male. But nonprofit has a model to show the world. We just have to get our voices out there.
Thank you for sharing that statistic. Do I see some questions in the chat? Not sure. Any questions? Just feel free to unmute yourself, or anything that resonated with you from the breakout discussions that you had.
Rashida,
Well, hi, sorry, this is Shay. I do have a question as you, Rashida and Mary were talking about the executive being in the CEOs. What are some ways that we can help support young girls to take those necessary steps to be those CEOs? You know, we have lots of programs out there, and there's leadership programs and STEM programs and art programs, but are there specific ways that we can really assist girls to not only see themselves in the position, but get in that position? Do we need to have allies, male allies to help them get into those positions? Are there skills that they really have to double down and kind of, for lack of a better term, force their way in? Because so often I see that we're generating really great interest and opportunities for girls, but there's that glass ceiling that's never been and very hard to break through.
I would say one skill that young girls need to learn and be comfortable with is being okay with conflict. It is, I think, one attribute that women in general are uncomfortable with.
Being okay with, what was that word?
Being okay with conflict. And they shy away from jobs where they think there will be conflict. And so helping them learn to have fierce conversations and to have, Ginsburg and who's the other guy? were a good example of two that had very differing points of view about the law, but were still good friends.
Lead
Yes.
Yeah.
My
Linda?
Go ahead.
No, calling on you. Go ahead.
Okay. My sister-in-law runs the Girls on the Run program, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. It's the Napa Valley, Solano Valley, Northern California. And they have, it's like 3 to 5th grade, 3rd to 5th grade. And they have a self-esteem program, curriculum, and then they run a 5K, learn to ride a 5K. And in the curriculum, they deal with self-esteem, self-image, that I'm okay just the way I am. You know, I don't need the perfect body or the perfect this. Also dealing with hard decision making and family dynamics. And it's been just tremendously successful with young women. So I think it's close to what Mary was talking about too, in terms of the kind of, by the 3rd grade, we have found that by the 3rd grade, young girls who started the 1st grade with a fairly high self-esteem, it begins to plunge by the 3rd grade.
I think also, something that is not up to women per se in any characteristics that they need to develop on their own, is something that is up to our country, and that is the US is the only developed country doesn't provide federally funded childcare.
Very, yeah, absolutely.
And so no matter how confident, right, no matter how well a woman handles conflict, no matter what her credentials are, should she be one who also wants to have a family at some point in her life, still, she is the one primarily responsible for childcare and also elder care, even when the elders are her husband's parents, right? So as long as that's the case, and here's an opportunity where since March in this country, both parents in heterosexual families, particularly I'm talking about fathers and mothers, have been forced to stay home. And if they have children, they are now with their children pretty much 24/7. Has that changed any of the parenting responsibilities, whether the mother or the father shoulders them? There was a recent survey where women and men were asked that, and whereas women responded, they've increased it probably maybe, I think it was 5%, it was definitely in the single digits. Men responded saying over 70%, they increased the amount of childcare they're provided. Obviously there is that's quite a difference. Until this country provides federally funded childcare that is reliable, it's going to continually impact how far women can go in their careers in this country. And that's a very important, and that's what also the pandemic has revealed, right? Because here we have the schools are closed. And for those families that need to go out to work, particularly if they're single family heads of households and they're women, how can they go to work and feed their families when schools are closed? I mean, this is just one of the issues that this pandemic has brought forth to the surface more than ever.
I wonder if,
and as a mom of a 3-year-old, that is very difficult to do. As I was in my group trying to still feed my child, figure out what's going on. It is definitely difficult to do. And the pandemic has definitely raised that bar, because you still are expected to perform at work, regardless if you have your child. Got to try to put her in school now so that I can't lose my job, because the response is, well, I mean, you can go out on COVID leave, and it's like, you can't, because that's 2/3 pay. It's very stressful. It's very, very stressful. So
I wonder if I could add something there. I think to a large extent, the pandemic has been somewhat on the backs of women, and I think we need to acknowledge that and think about that. But I think role models are very important, and visions that girls develop for themselves, which are linked to role models. And I think the point that Anna was making earlier about power and girls and women being comfortable with notions of power, I think that's important. So a sense of empowerment and agency. And I would agree with what the person said about allies, for sure.
And let me just add, my granddaughter, who just graduated from college, and her senior paper was on owning the word bitch. And it was about the changing definition of the word bitch from a female dog to all of the other definitions that it has today. And her concluding response was, women need to own the word bitch and not let it put them off. Not be afraid of being called a bitch.
With boss in front of it.
I also wonder, this is Barbara, I'm from Girls Inc. of Long Island. I also wonder if even the nature of work as a 9-to-5 endeavor, and even more than that, I mean, when we think of a CEO of an organization, I mean, honestly, that's why I don't want to be an ED, is because I know how, and I see how hard the EDs that I've worked under work and how many hours they work, and they give up a lot of their personal free time. And I do think I've read research that women generally also have a lot more hobbies even, and like interests in the community and being in their community than men. And that kind of does impact it too. So I do wonder if part of the issue is not just childcare, but actually the nature of work as so all-consuming in this society.
Can I just jump in for a second, if that's okay? I definitely agree with that. I have two of my colleagues with me, and they can tell you I will start my day between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's about this time or 8 o'clock at night I will be done. I work on the weekends. Why? Because I own that word, bitch. I put boss in front of it because I have a goal. I know what I want to do and I know what I want to accomplish. Have I sacrificed a lot? Yeah. My family will get the back burner because I know what I need to do, educational wise and performance wise when it comes to work. I don't know if that's bad, good, or indifferent, but I agree with that. We women, as women, I definitely say, one of my colleagues here, I don't know how she does it as a mom, as head of QI. Yes, Nimi, I'm talking about you. She is, I have to say, she's one of the leaders in our agency, and an exceptional woman. This woman does it all, and I'm saying that professionally. She is exceptional with what she does, and she's someone I definitely look up to. Sorry, Nimi.
Thank you for sharing. Anna, I know you were trying to jump in for a couple of minutes. And please add to Shay's question your advice on cultivating that with young women in particular, girls and women.
Thank you, Rashida. It's kind of, so Shay, we have seen that the power of what we call by and for, the power of, young women of color, girls and young women of color, and Ace knows that from other things we've done together, and generation citizens know that. So we've been funding young women advisory councils, in which the dominant voice and the voice is young women of color. So the experience of not being, of being the dominant culture, the system reflects back, the system supports, so that it's not so much adaptive behavior to another system, but it is full beingness, the full beingness of young women of color in the case as being the dominant way of being, so the sense of the construction of my agency, the worth of my beingness, I'm not conforming to another pattern, I'm being it. And through that, I can generate in the world together. There's a profound belief in, and this is Rich in our particular group was talking about that, different cultural traditions, different societies, and when we talk about equity and we talk about justice, the concept that problems and solutions live in the same place, right? That leaders and followers are the agents. And I mean that in quotes, because I don't mean that in any hierarchical or pejorative way. I mean that as the exchange, that if we firmly believe that problems and solutions live in the same place, we automatically see that people are fully capable of designing their lives, their communities, their societies, and that the concerns that we have, around, how do we get people to change things? How do we get people to achieve things? It kind of gets turned over, to the various communities, to the various groups. And so Shay, we have found that doing that funding these environments, funding like with like, funding by and for, produces incredible results, that investing, of course, this is a conversation about investing in human beings, right? That has been the best way. Now, there is a Young Women's Initiative in New York City and in 9 other cities and states in the US, which is, it's about the agency by and for young women of color. And Girls for Gender Equity in New York City is the leading agency. And so the young women in that Young Women's Advisory Council, they, for instance, in collaboration with other Young Women Advisory Councils in the country, have come up with a young Black women's agenda, you know, and they're all young. They are, you know, we're not debating leadership, not leadership is the beingness, you know, is the full expression of that. So I just wanted to share that with you, Shay, because you know, it's just there, you know, it's just there, and I can connect you with folks, and I can connect anybody with that we can possibly be helpful in that.
Would love that, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're at time. Michael, before we started, I think you had a comment, and I didn't want to overlook you before we closed out. Did you have something you wanted to share earlier?
Well, I was just going to give my favorite line from Gloria Steinem, if I might. We all have to be hopeaholics at this time.
Absolutely. And if I could just add one thing, I think you have to name it and claim it. And I think it's kind of what Mary was talking about in terms of conflict, negotiating your way to positions of power within institutions and organizations is going to entail conflict. And I look at my own trajectory and the times that I've had to negotiate for equitable pay, higher positions. I've had to actually articulate that, not wait for someone to hand it to me, but say, I want to be a director. I want to join the executive team. I want to do these things, and then start that conversation, which may be very difficult and may create conflict, but it's something that I don't feel as women we're often empowered to do. And I've heard from many men that that's just a natural part often of their conversations in negotiating the workspace, is saying, this is what I want, to that person who's in a position to give it to them. And I think we have to communicate in that same way. And it's not easy, but if we don't say it and speak to what it is that we want and where we want to go, then we're not going to get those positions handed to us, at least not in this time. Not at this time, but hopefully we can aspire that it's going to happen. So that's my one thing that I would like to share. And so Shelley, do you do the door prize after or before? Do you want me to close it out?
Oh, I can take care of the door prize right now if we're all willing to go with
Okay.
it.
Well, what I would like to do is I would just really like to give a round of applause and thank Lori Sokol, Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Women's eNews, Linda Lambert and Mary Gardner, co-authors of Women's Ways of Leading, and Anna Oliviera, the President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation. Really thank you all so much for sharing your journeys, your stories, your words of wisdom, and thank you for just being open to, you know, wanting to continue this conversation with fellows by sharing your contact information. I'm sure people are going to be reaching out to you. And please, everyone, I think one of the door prizes may be books, but if you're not recipient, definitely encourage you to read the literature that these women have put forth, and also learn more about their organizations. They're doing some really wonderful work, and we have a lot to learn from them. So thank you all. So let's see who wins the door prize.
This is a little tradition of ours, so I'm going, in the past we would have like an actual hat with names in it. Now we've got to do this digitally, but we have this nice little wheel of names. I'm going to click the spin it. Oh, she had to step out, but Carolyn McLaughlin was here. She's one of our mentors and a close personal friend of Michael's, I do believe, so I'll get in touch with her.
I'm still on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carolyn, all right, Carolyn.
Oh, hi, Carolyn.
For all of you who may not be familiar with Bronx Works, Carolyn has stepped down from CEO and built the organization from $50,000 a year to what, between 20 and 30 million, Carolyn?
Wow. 36, yeah.
They're $36 million. And she is she's just and one of our first mentors as well, and we're delighted to have her here. We're also delighted that Rich Rivera is here, who's also been a mentor and a faculty member since our inception. But Carolyn, you embody everything we're talking about today. Thank you for everything
Michael.
you've done.
Thank you.
I agree. I had the pleasure of Carolyn being in my group, and when I asked her about women's ways of leading and what she's seen, she was the example. So I really appreciate getting to know her. So congratulations on the
That's
door
very
prize.
kind. Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, any parting thoughts before we go?
We have another winner. The two door prizes are one of each book that has been described here, that has been authored by the people here. So the first door prize will be actually, let's see, for Lori's book, and the second one will be from our two co-authors. So let's go for the second winner.
All right, then let's spin again. I will just remove Carolyn from the pool, and let's spin. It's Brooke Wallace, very narrowly. We have Brooke Wallace.
Oh,
Brooke, are you still on?
Yeah.
Fabulous. I'll have to update you with my new address in San Diego.
Oh, fascinating.
All right. Shelley, we still have to talk about if we close with our next meeting of our leadership conversation.
Oh, yes. Okay. So our next leadership conversation will be Monday, October 19th. We're going to be doing it on the power of storytelling. Just give me one moment because I know Michael had a little, yes. So we are going to discuss and bring our own stories and hear from experts on how to make storytelling an effective tool for your organization. And lastly, I know Michael wanted to do this, so just give me 1 second. Michael wanted to close out by playing Aretha Franklin's Respect. Michael, do you want to say anything about it before I hit play?
I think there's nothing to say about it, but to hear about it.
Absolutely.
Hear it.
All right.
So thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night,
Panel,
everybody.
Lori, Mary, Linda, Anna, thank
Hey,
you.
everyone. This is awesome.
Thank you, Michael and Shelley. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rashida.
Good night.
See you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Mary.
Have a good night, everyone.
And thank you, Ani,
Thank you.
Anna, and thank you, Lori.